To find out how spiritual growth works, we have to answer ourselves several questions. That means, first of all, we have to explore what is generally growing and why it is doing that. Apart from that, we have to consider the circumstances and factors which are necessary so that which is supposed to grow really can grow. And we have to look for the influences that are responsible that the growth is proceeding in an orderly fashion. Since it is doing so, we are obviously all located in a cosmos, in an ordered universe, so to speak. The human being is a complex being. That means that deep at the core of its heart is it at first and fundamentally a spark of that central fire or that cause from which the entire solar universe is pouring from. In philosophy, this spark or this homogeneous something is often called monad. It is derived from the ancient Greek word monas, which means as much as unity. One can think of this spark as the leading mind or the fundamental, vital, intelligent idea behind any substantial seed and therefore behind any being. It is absolutely spiritual and for the manifesting period of a solar system from which is part immortal. In esoteric philosophy, this spark or this monad sometimes is called a pilgrim, since it goes on a journey into matter countless times or dresses a part of it into it. The monad is doing this to achieve individual perfect consciousness through experience on its particular level. Therefore, it is very important for us to understand that in order to learn and to develop itself, this spark has to dress itself in substance or matter. This is because it needs a medium to be able to express itself. If human beings hadn't any extremities, no mouth, no ears, eyes, and no nose, no will, and no mind, had we simply no physical, astral, psychic, and higher mental body, but only our relative developed consciousness, how could we ever be able to express ourselves, to learn, and gain experience? At this point, however, I would like at first to point to the process of developing consciousness once again, since this is of absolutely importance. The reason for that is the fact that by wrapping the spark in the covers of substance or matter, they are being lifted up to a certain degree, since they themselves, how could it be any different, are also consisting of such uncountable bands which are developing cosmic sparks or life unities. This means This means that the monad or the later on fully conscious spark the true human being has to take full responsibility for those raised components of this composed entity and guide them. It will then has grow out of its children's shoes, overcome the awkward age, and become a real co-worker of nature. Unlike the sun, or rather the entity behind it, the sun locus, that consciously is father and keeper of the solar system. We ourselves are, in fact, already now a hierarch of our own little microcosmos that we call our body. Most of the time of our acting not being aware of that, however, which is often tragic since we have got already responsibility for it. The process itself turns out the way that the relatively unconscious celestial spark, the monad, first of all, has to find itself separated from everything to gradually recognize consciously that it is a part of everything that surrounds it. For this reason, it descends into matter and dresses itself partly in it in order to turn towards the light later on from it. This individual monadic part, which wraps itself in matter, can also be called as individual consciousness or individual ego. It's it that learns by its incarceration into matter to reflect its consciousness onto itself. By doing so, it initially perceives its mayavic, its temporarily limited existence, so to speak, as an entity which is separated from everything else. You can describe this the way that those material covers in which the individual monadic part dresses itself in the beginning is preventing it to recognize the surrounding objects the way they really are. As a result, the incarnated being, quasi each one of us, so to speak, is failing by the attempt to express oneself, since it violates the cosmic law principles, which it doesn't recognize because of its blindness. In real terms, this means that it has to learn to permeate these self-created these self-created covers consciously, completely, in order to acquire the proper handling with them, to unfold through it, and to be able to develop the latent existing forces completely. But until the time comes, it is just natural that the incarnated being isn't using the provided means like it should, due to its initial wrong conclusion and its ignorance. For some time, it therefore develops the conviction of being separated from all other beings. This happens by identifying with the surrounding material covers, which create an apparent barrier between itself and all other beings. Because of the corresponding handling with these covers, it considers the appearance of emotions within itself, the craving involved with it, and the resulting thoughts as real and absolutely meaningful, which they aren't by the fact of their transience. Buddhism explains it this way. Qualities and abilities are brought into movement by causes which are themselves only effects of other former causes. It is called dependency, what means that these qualities do not own an independent, real existence, but are a product of processes and objects which carry the same attribute. Since they don't have an independent, real existence, however, and are just of temporary duration, they become elusive and therefore not really significant. The problem is that we are building entire worlds around these objects and use them as the foundation for our lives, since we are, as mentioned before, identifying ourselves with them. The activating impulse for the wrong handling of the covers, which can also be called the physical, emotional, desiring or craving, causing, and mental corpses, just to mention that once again, is just fundamental ignorance. And as a result of that, the continuing, hanging on, and identifying with them. The resultant particular touch, kind, or quality of those objects is affecting and shaping our momentarily perception, our actions, and of course, our character. Our decisions based on what's good or bad for us. Through this, we divide the world in two parts. This way, our so-called personality is being created. The personal ego, the mask or filter behind which our individual, always reincarnating ego or consciousness resides. The picture is getting more clearly for us when we bring into our mind that our perception of the world is taking place through this personality. That means through this side-taking and therefore a part of the world declining ego. The once before mentioned misuse of the provided aids or capabilities has the following effect. Instead of cultivating lovingness, patience, equability, sympathy, and wisdom, we develop negative emotions like anger, envy, hatred, greed, pride, as well as jealousy, and accumulate secondary, one-sided knowledge which makes it impossible for us to look beyond the obvious, so that we could be able to recognize the truth ever surrounding us. I just talked about transitoriness. Well, this transitoriness is plainly the attribute for all manifestation and combined laws. Nothing stays as it used to be shortly before, for even a split second. The entire universe is in flow and underlies a constant change, a never-ending development, since just this progress or this becoming is forming the purpose of the appearance of all these countless worlds. But since we have decided to cling to these manifested and compounded objects because we hang on the belief that they would give us a lasting basis, this unloved phenomenon, suffering, arises. We are suffering when objects get lost. Things we turned towards too, on which we count, which give us a meaning and something to hold on in order to ease the bearing of all the efforts of daily life to sustain the just mentioned objects for us. It is just this kind of suffering, however, that represents the foundation for our advancement. Suffering is also often referred to the great teacher. Why so? Well, it compels us to overcome our rigid perceptions, to look beyond our self-established boundaries, to reflect ourselves, to realign ourselves, and to change, if we don't want to go down with it. To depict the picture more clearly, however, we have to include karma, or the law of cause and effect, in our observations. During the process of keeping the universe in harmony, the dissonances caused by ignorance are being reflected on the actor by karma. Thus, he is more or less compelled to reflect the interactions with the environment to find a way to dissolve these discrepancies if he, just like mentioned before, doesn't want to suffer. This way, the human being concerned acquires a clear picture in the course of time of itself and everything that surrounds it. If it recognizes this consciously, it already achieved a big step toward true spiritual growing or growth. Slowly it begins to use its mental and spiritual abilities systematically in daily life. That means it starts to observe its emotional and mental impulses from a higher viewpoint and to introduce the resulting insights into its perspective, expressing oneself. If this procedure is still strange to it, however, and it doesn't act upon it, it will be deceived by its prejudiced impressions of its personality. It will continually develop new mechanisms to avoid the dissonances caused by karma, to initiate compensation. Eventually, it won't know anymore where the beginning or the cause is for all this meanwhile unbearable suffering. Many of the patients who receive nowadays treatment in psychotherapeutic facilities suffer from such psychic troubles, which have their cause within here. That doesn't mean, of course, that one has to end up in that kind of an institution in any case. Sooner or later, the prospects for each incarnating entity are awesome, however, because of the just described cosmic principles that compel oneself to unfold permanently and to express, as well as the process that keeps this unfolding and expressing oneself in those conditions which underlie the manifested universe. Every one of these beings is reaching eventually a point during its evolution where it recognizes the ego-bound barriers of its free will and starts to implement the inputs of true spiritual growth. It's that point in its evolution when it realizes that it doesn't exist separated from all the other surrounding beings, but instead it lives in symbiosis and unity with them. The earlier mentioned observation of the own emotional and mental impulses with the help of the ethic and moral basic principles which originate from the creative part of the universe will be gradually integrated in daily life more and more. The new quality of expressing oneself resulting from these observations is eventually the cause that transformation takes place. The entity that once was developing like a cancer cell against the standards of the universe is transforming into a complete, conscious, integral human being operating with the cosmos and therefore with nature. It then enters those paths which were prepared by the pioneers of human beings in order for us to get there where they already are. And that is real true humanity. Thank you. And what is to do now? Claudia will explain.